Welcome, students, to the fourth session of our history class. Lesson 1, Bricks, Beads and Bones. In the previous three classes, we had discussed about the various agriculture and craft production activities of the Harappan people. We also studied about their town planning, their social practices, their trade, and their administration. Today, we shall see how civilizations ended, its discovery, and the problems faced by historians while reconstructing their history. Let us begin our lesson today by asking, how did this civilization end? Approximately by 1800 BCE, we find evidence that most of the mature Harappan sites, such as Cholistan, were abandoned. But on the other hand, new settlements in Gujarat, Haryana, and Punjab expanded. The sites which continued after 1900 BCE witnessed a cultural transformation. Distinctive artifacts of Harappan civilization began to disappear. Along with seals, weights, special beads, long distance trade, all started fading away. We see a deterioration in construction techniques, large buildings, and craft specialization. These sites from 1900 BCE began to portray a rural style. This period was now designated as the late Harappa or the successor culture. The question that now arises is, what was the reason for these changes? Historians have come up with many possibilities. Some believe that it was due to the climatic change. Some feel it was due to deforestation or floods, while others argue it was due to the river changing its course, as seen in case of Mesopotamian civilization. Still others argue it was due to river drying up or maybe overuse of land. Some of these suggestions might be true for small settlements, but it cannot explain the collapse of an entire civilization. It seems that maybe due to a unified element, the entire administration of Harappan collapsed, and that is the reason we witness a disappearance of seals, pottery, script, and emergence of a localized weight and measurement as against the standardized system of weights. There is almost a gap of 1,000 years for the new cities to emerge in the same location. So far, we have studied how historians have used various artifacts and architectural remains to reconstruct the fascinating history of Harappan civilization. But now we look at another interesting story, a story of how this civilization was discovered. The story begins some 1,000 years later when this area was re inhabited by people and who would often find strange artifacts while plowing their field or got it surfaced by floods or soil erosion, and yet others found them while they were digging for treasures. In 1861, Alexander Cunningham was appointed as the archaeological surveyor to the government of India. In fact, his main interest was in the archaeology of early historics of the time period between 6th century to 4th century BCE. He used the travel accounts of Chinese and Buddhist pilgrims to reconstruct the location of towns and cities between 4th century and the 7th century Common Era. During his excavation, he collected artifacts which he thought had cultural significance. Since Harappa was not mentioned in any of the travel accounts, he did not feel the need to investigate the occasional artifacts that were found. Even when the seal was given to him, he recorded its discovery, but could not successfully place it with the time frame with which he was familiar with. Basically, because he thought that the Indian history began with Ganga Valley civilization. In 1922, Rai Bahadur Dayaram Sahani, a protege of John Marshall, discovered seals in Harappa in the layers which were much deeper than the early historics. During the same time period, Rakhel Das Banerjee found similar seals in Mohenjo-daro, leading to conclusion that these seals were part of the same culture. On the basis of these finds, John Marshall, the then Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, in 1924 announced the discovery of a new civilization, thus leaving India 3,000 years older than he had found it. In fact, his tenure in India brought major changes in Indian archaeology. He was a professional with experience in Greece and Crete. His zeal for spectacular finds led him to look for patterns in everyday life. And it was in this zeal that he began excavation along regular horizontal units, ignoring the stratigraphy over the mounds. He grouped all the artifacts as the part of a same unit, due to which valuable information was irrevertibly lost. His mistake was then rectified by R.E.M. Wheeler. He understood the significance of the stratigraphy of mounds as contrast to digging uniformly. Post independence, most of the Harappan sites became a part of Pakistan. This led to a surgence by Indian archaeologists to excavate sites in India as well. Apart from Kalibangan, Lothal, Rakhigarhi, Dholavira, Kunal in Panipat has recently been excavated. Since 1980, there has been a steady growth by the world in Harappan archaeology. Archaeologists from all over the world are using different and modern scientific techniques to recover evidence, giving us hope for a better result in future. As you are already aware, Harappan script is not yet deciphered. The archaeologists depend on material remains such as pottery, tools, ornaments, household objects to understand the ancient civilization. We need to keep in mind that organic material might have decomposed. Also, most of the valuable objects might have been recycled or hoarded. While archaeologists try to reconstruct the history of Harappa, they are faced with two problems. One, how to classify their finds, and the other is how to understand the religious practices with the help of artifacts discovered. We first try to understand how archaeologists classify their finds. The simple way is to ascertain the material with which they are made up of and, for example, clay, metal, bone, shell, ivory, etc. And the second method and the more complicated classification is the function of the object. This can be understood by going from known to unknown, which means looking at the present use of a particular object, we assume that it was used for a similar purpose in the past. Another mean to understand the function of the object is the place from where it was discovered. For example, if a pot was discovered in the cooking area or the bathing area, we assume that it was used for storing water or food grains. Sometimes archaeologists depend on indirect evidence, like to understand the clothing style of the time period. For this, we need to look at the sculptures. Sometimes archaeologists need to develop frames of references to understand the cultural sequence and to compare it with the contemporary Mesopotamian civilization. Lastly, archaeologists face a lot of problem while they try to reconstruct the religious practices. Some unfamiliar and unusual objects were believed to have religious significance. For example, this terracotta figurine of the mother goddess was depicted with an elaborate headgear and a lot of jewelry. Another discovery was that of priest king, which you have already studied about earlier. Sometimes large structures were also associated with ritualistic significance, like that of Great Bath studied earlier. Sometimes depictions on seals too help us to reconstruct religious practices. Seals with plant motifs were believed to be indicators of worship of nature, while others with unicorn had mythical significance. Another seal, designated as Proto Shiva, shows a yogi sitting cross legged and surrounded by animal, is believed to be the early form of the Hindu god Shiv. What led these archaeologists to believe as such is because they go from known to the unknown. Sometimes these reconstructions become speculative, as Proto Shiva or Rudra was never depicted as Pashupati or a yogi. Some historians call this figurine as that of a shaman. Likewise, these small artifacts were designated as lingas but were later dismissed as pawns in a broad game by McCoy. Although we have a treasure of knowledge about the Harappan civilization, our understanding will be complete only once the language is deciphered. With this, we end today's class. Here is an assignment for you all. So, on the basis of the text which you can download from your computers, you need to read the text and then find out the material that was used for making beads, and you need to describe the various ways in which beads were made. The second assignment is that you need to imagine that you are a peasant or an artisan in Harappa, and then you need to describe what kind of a lifestyle you had. Another question that you need to answer is how the archaeologists reconstruct the past. With this, we end today's lesson. We shall meet again tomorrow. Until then, stay home, stay safe.